Okay, so this is lab 12 and it focuses on visualization. This is the notebook I will be explaining, and the questions you're going to be working on are actually already here on Moodle for topic 12. So it's very much related to what I'm going to be explaining today. So these are the questions you're going to solve, but you will see virtually everything will be discussed in my lab 12 visualization.py code. So it's very similar, or some of it is very similar to what you already did on lab 11. It just takes it a little further. So if I go back here and you look at the question, the first question is basically a modified form of lab 11. So the important thing is I'm giving you a dca.db file on GitHub, and you will be basically retrieving the information that is already stored in this database. So you are not creating your own database this time around. And then make the plots you made the last time, except that now you're doing something different, right? The rate will be on the primary y-axis, while the cumulative production will be on the secondary y-axis. And I'll show you how to do that. So let's get started. The database is sitting right here, and we can look at it. If you go install this tool, which I told you about in the video, it's DB browser for SQLite. We can open database, and this is the database right now. Let me make sure this is what I want. Yes. So this is what I want. It's slightly different from what you had before. What's different? There is a rate ID, which wasn't in the previous version. The previous version had everything else except this rate ID. Why did I add rate ID? To make a primary key. So this is a primary key, and like we said, primary keys are unique identifiers. They go from 1 to the entire length of the database table. So it goes from 1 to 408. Well ID isn't a unique identifier for the rates database table because it's repeated, right? It's repeated for well 1. So you have well ID repeated because you have rates from time 1 to 24. Then you go to well 2 and you have rates, QIMs, and the other production data from time 1 to 24th month, and so on. So we have added this, and I'll show you how I added this. And also, if you go to the DCA params, I've added this. I shouldn't have done that. But basically, I've added the fluid telling you whether it's an oil well or a gas well. And I show you how I add those in code. Everything else is identical. You also notice well ID goes from 1 to 17. So it's unique for each well, right? Each well has a unique initial flow rate, initial decline rate, and B exponent. So the primary key for the DCA params database table is well ID. The primary key for the rates database table is rates ID. There is also well ID in the rates table, but it is not unique here. So it is a foreign key. So rate ID is the primary key for the rates data frame. rate data table, and it well ID is the foreign key for the rates database table. So that's the important thing to note, and I'll show you how we create that shortly. So we're going to create this table here, but in your workbook you wouldn't be creating the table since you already learned how to create it here. You will just retrieve the information already stored in the table. So this remains as before. This creates the DCA.db table if it doesn't exist already, but it does exist already, so it doesn't recreate it, it just connects to it. And this is your cursor, and CONN is your connection. So we can begin to use this CUR to communicate or to talk to the database. This remains as before. This is how I want to create it from scratch. So I'm going to actually delete this, because if you try to run this, it will fail. So let's do that actually. So to run these segments, I do Control Enter, and it fails. Why? Table DCA params already exists. So you're trying to create DCA params table, but it already exists. So it doesn't allow you to do it. This is what will happen if in your solution to lab 12 you try to recreate a table. So we're going to delete this and create it in code. So now it doesn't exist anymore, and now when you run this, it doesn't connect to the table because it doesn't connect to the database because the DCA.db doesn't exist, so it creates it. If I run just this, you see it has created it, but it is empty. And if you go visualize it here, you can close, open database, DCA.db. It's empty. That's why there's nothing in here. So create the cursor to the connection, and now we create the database table called DCA params. And if we go back here, we can refresh, and now it shows up. It's still empty, but we've created the table. So the table is empty, but the database now exists. So we can put data into the table. This remains as we discussed the last time. Here is how I create the fluids. So remember I showed you gas and oil wells. I showed you some of the wells were labeled as gas wells and the others were labeled as oil wells. This is how I do it. It's just totally random, right? So random.randint. So give me 5 random numbers between 1 and 17. There are 17 wells, right? So give me 5 random numbers. Start from a low of 1 and get to high of 17. And those will be the well IDs that will be set to gas wells. So we can run just this, and you go to the variable explorer, gas well ID, and you can actually see the wells. So 15, 1, 16, 6, and 3 are the wells that we're going to make gas wells. So well 15 will be your first gas well. Well 3 will be your third gas well. So it's totally random. And this is how we created that. Now, everything here is pretty much the same. But before I go in here, I just realized I didn't talk about this. So this has changed from what you had before. Previously, you had just this, right? Well ID is an integer, QI, real, and others, right? We've added the fluid, which is a text, and it's going to be either oil or gas. So this is what we've added, not null. because primary keys cannot be null, they must exist. We'll specify it's a primary key. Auto increment, so it can automatically go from 1 to the last item in the table. And then we commit. So we stop that gas well ID. We already ran up to this point. So let's look through this. This is identical to what we had before. These are two ways of doing the same thing, but we don't care about this because we're just going to stick to our use of F strings, which are formatted strings. So F strings. And the important thing we've added is this. So we have an if statement. If the current well ID, which is going from 1 through 18, it's going to stop at 17, is in the gas well ID I just opened up, which is 15, 1, 16, 6, and 3. So you start out with 1, right? Well ID first time through this loop is 1. Is 1 in the gas well ID? Yes, so that's a gas well. And so you come into the last entry into the column, which is this, and put in gas for well 1. Then you continue through the loop. The next time through the loop, well ID is 2. Is 2 in gas well IDs? No. So it goes in here and it sets it to oil. So it puts oil in the last column. And that's how you're able to switch from gas well to oil well. So that's the main change here. Everything else is identical to what you had before. No change. And you plot just as we did before. Again, still no changes. And here I'm not showing, I don't want it to generate this image right now. Here I'm not showing the rate and the QM on the same plot. I'll later show you how to do that, and you can plot it so they're on the same plot. Control Enter, and then runs it. And we're just plotting cumulative production right now. In your lab assignment, you will plot both rate and QM production. So we can come back here and use this to refresh. And now you see the gas wells. That's the only change so far. Your rate table, it's still identical. How about the rate ID, which you want to be the primary key, because we already know this is repeating, right? So it is not unique. So this is your foreign key. We need a primary key. We're going to alter this table and create another table which will have rate ID. So because we're using SQLite, it doesn't have an alter command inbuilt into it. So we use this construct right here to artificially create our primary key. So you don't have to memorize this. This is just a workaround for SQLite. So first thing is we rename the rate database table you just saw to underscore old rates, just to keep it in there. So rename it, and you can go check it out here. Refresh. Rates no longer exist, is now renamed as underscore old rates. Same thing we saw just now. Then we're going to create a new database table called rates to replace what you had before. And this is what's going to be in there. The rate ID, which is your primary key. Integer, that's the data type. Primary key, like I showed before. Auto increment, like I showed before, for the DCA params table. So this makes rate ID your primary key. Well ID, which will be the foreign key, is here, and all these other parameters are set as usual. And the last three lines here is what makes well ID a foreign key in the rates database table. So again, in the rates database table, well ID is your foreign key. But in the DCA params database table, well ID is your primary key. And this is how you do it, these three lines. FK, which stands for foreign key underscore the name of the database table in which well ID is the primary key, the name of the foreign key in this database table, and this references gives you what you want the name of the foreign key to be, and the database table in which it is a primary key. So it basically links those two tables together using the well ID, which is the foreign key. And that's what these three lines do. Again, you don't need to memorize any of these. You just need to understand it well enough to be able to copy it and paste it and modify for use for whatever application you're working on. So we can run these two and it just creates the table, but there is nothing in there. So we can refresh it and see. Now if you go to rates, the primary key is there. This is your secondary key and it's all empty. So we need to populate it. How do you put data into a database? Insert into. So insert into the rates database table. This is the data we want to insert into it. And where are we going to get it from? We use a read command, right? How do you read data from database? We use select. So we select all of the data we want, which is almost everything from the old rates database table. And the order you put these guys are important. So you see the orders match, and visually all we're doing is grabbing well ID, basically everything here, and putting it in here, but at the appropriate places we want them to be. And of course we're going to have rate ID as the primary key. So there is no rate ID in this list. How does it know how to fill it up? It knows because of this auto increment. So it will start from 1 and automatically go through to the length of the entire data coming from the old rates database table. And you can convince yourself this works by running this and visualizing it. And that's exactly the case. It starts from 1 and goes through to the last item in the database table rates. And again, this is your foreign key. You can close the connection. And we move on to discussing how to plot. Let me check how much time I have on this video. Yeah, I'm going to pause it right here and create a part 2 and move on to the plotting.